Good morning, everybody. Thanks for pitching up to this autumn meeting of the Marine Science Technology Group. For those that you don't know, we tend to preface our meetings with a talk by somebody that's relevant to our sector, and we're lucky in two respects this week, in that we've got a number of participants from outside of our interest group, which is great, and welcome to you, and also that we've got Max Goulden from MacAlister Elliott and partners, who are specialists in aquaculture, operate worldwide, and I know this will be of interest to a lot of people on our council and with interest in Marine Science Technology Group. So I think the normal way to do these kind of things is to, morning Claire, is to mute yourselves, and if we start to get video problems, maybe turn the video off as well. But for now, thanks very much, Max, for agreeing to do this. So I'll pass it straight over to you, good self.
No problem still. Thank you for inviting me. I think I've done this before, but I can't remember when it was. I mean, everything pre-COVID sort of fallen into a black hole as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I've definitely done this before. So hopefully I don't necessarily recognize a huge amount of you. So if you've heard all of this before, I apologize. If it's new, that's great. Let me just see if I can remember how to get my presentation up on Zoom. How have we done? Can everyone see that? Yep.
Yeah, I can see that. If you just make it into full screen. Then
yeah, I'll put it into slideshow mode. Okay, good. Let me get going then. So just a quick brief about what I'm going to do for you today. It's not a long presentation. It probably won't take the full time, but happy to take any questions, obviously, on the industry and what's been going on. The idea really is just to give an overview of ourselves quickly, just because we can, and then an overview of the aquaculture industry globally, and then really focus down on some of the more interesting areas, maybe for you as a group, certainly within Europe, and some of the changes that have been occurring probably since I last did this presentation, and how the industry has changed in recent years. So just as a very quick background on us, I'm not going to spend much time today talking about me, because it's not really what it's here for, but MEP, MacAlister Elliott and Partners. Unfortunately, our email addresses are all MacAlister-Elliott, because we didn't get in ahead of the members of the European Parliament. Otherwise, we'd have definitely been MEP.com. But we were founded in 1977. We're based in Lymington, down on the south coast. Lovely place to be. We are here for no other reason than our founders like sailing. Other than that, it's a completely useless place to be, because it's nowhere near anywhere, but lovely place to work from. We've worked in around 75 countries around the world. So we do very little work actually in the UK. I think last time I checked, our figures around 5% of our income was from the UK. Most of it's developing nations. So we do a lot of work in Africa. I think last time I checked, we've worked in every country in Africa apart from 2. And that's because they haven't got any sea. Also done a lot of work in the Middle East, Asia, all over the place. And it's quite a small, consultancy in aquaculture and fisheries is quite a small world. So you tend to work wherever there's work, you're not limited to a certain place. We are fisheries and aquaculture consultants. So my background is in aquaculture, but we also do fisheries as well. That was our beginning of our business, and aquaculture is something that's grown over the last 10 to 20 years, really, is when it's really started to increase. It's about 40% of our revenues through aquaculture now, and 60% through fisheries. Just examples of our clients are up on the screen here, just for you to give you an idea. We work a lot with all sorts, from the World Bank through to aid agencies, through to some of the more common ones in the UK, through to major oil companies. It really, really varies. I mean, I never quite know who we're going to be working for next. It really does beg a belief sometimes, the people that ask for our services. As I said, around 40% of our work is aquaculture related. Our work, we don't design or build aquaculture systems. We don't build fish farms. That's not what we do. We are a business that really works on the financial, commercial side, and also on technical feasibility, that sort of side. So we tend to work with businesses on aquaculture projects, on whether they're working, how they're going. Very famous thing with aquaculture is they reckon around 40% to 60% of all new startup aquaculture businesses fail within the first 3 years. So quite often with aquaculture, we find that there's a lot of people running around doing it and not wondering whether they should be doing it because they're not going to make any money. So we tend to focus more on that side of the business because that's generally when people come to us when they've got a problem. We also work at the government level. So we worked a lot for different governments around the world. We've worked, as I said there, Vietnam and Oman, variety of projects, also working in the Falklands at the moment, which is interesting. Ironically, it was one of the first countries we could actually travel to because it was on the green list quite early. Just as 3 examples for you, just to give you a flavour of the work we do. Lake Harvest, Zimbabwe. So Lake Harvest is the biggest tilapia farm in the world. Tilapia is a fish that we don't eat much of in this UK, but it's quite well known around the world. Set up in Zimbabwe, which had all sorts of issues. We did some due diligence work for the funding agencies there, looking at how it could be improved, etc. Very interesting work. Vietnam, working in Vietnam at the moment on an environmental impact review. So basically looking at carbon footprinting of different aquaculture activities. So, how much carbon are these companies using? How does it compare to fishing? And, is it carbon neutral? Can it be carbon neutral, etc.? So that's quite interesting bit of work. And finally, Falklands. So Falklands are currently looking at ways to diversify their income, which is basically oil and ironically tourism. But they're considering salmon farming as an opportunity, which is slightly dangerous considering there aren't any salmon in South Atlantic. So there's a few issues around it. But yeah, it's been interesting working for them anyway. So hopefully this gives you a bit of a flavour of what we do as a company and what I try and do on a daily basis. And so let's just talk about aquaculture really and what the business is and how it works. The first thing, this is quite a common graph you see a lot. It's produced by the FAO, Fisheries and Aquaculture Organization. And the idea of it is to show how aquaculture has grown over the last, over two decades, really. So the orange bit is wild capture. So not fish farming, but fisheries, beat boats going out and catching fish as traditional fishing. And as you can see, over the last sort of decade, it's been pretty static. There's not been a big increase in the amount of catch in tonnage from this sector. And that's because most of the stocks in the sea are either overfished or at maximum sustainable yields. So there's not a huge opportunity to go out there and catch more fish. And yet, as you all know, the global population is growing, the need for fish is growing. And so really the blue bit demonstrates how aquaculture has grown over the last 2 decades. It's over now worth about 140 million tons per year produced in aquaculture. That's it's a big figure when you think about it, and 46% of global fish production. It's worth $263 billion per year to the world, basically. And it remains and is often quoted as the fastest growing food production sector in the world. So, in terms of where it's come from, where it's going, aquaculture is the growing way to produce food. It's the quickest growing sector. If you compare it to chickens, it's miles ahead. Chicken farming got to where it did today over not thousands of years, but hundreds of years. Fish farming is relatively new, and it's done pretty well to get this far so quickly. So as it demonstrates, it's definitely a very fast growing sector. And just what does that mean in terms of those figures? And this is just a breakdown of what it looks like. And again, I'm not going to go into huge detail here, but wanted to give you an understanding. That figure that we talked about is a big figure, but within that, what does that consist of? So this is just a breakdown by sort of species and groups. And basically the one at the bottom, the light blue, is what we call freshwater fin fish production. And that's the biggest by miles. So it's 54 million tons a year. And that's things like tilapia, catfish, stuff that's grown in ponds. So if you ever go to Vietnam, every house in Vietnam has a pond and it produces fish, normally for itself. So a lot of it is subsistence fishing, subsistence farming. It's not what we consider aquaculture in Europe, for example. And that is massive. And the biggest player in that by far is China, as you'll see in a minute. The next biggest one, top one, orange one, is algae. Seaweed production. We produce a huge amount of seaweed around the world. Again, lots of it's produced by small scale operations or individuals throughout Africa, throughout Asia. Most of this is not produced for food. Most of this is produced for alginates and agar. So I don't know, you guys probably know this or you don't, but a lot of the products we use today have got seaweed in them. So things like toothpaste that you use every morning has seaweed in it as a stabilizer, basically. It's not called seaweed on the product, but it is seaweed derivatives, basically. So it's a big industry, and it's been growing as well. And then next one down, we go to mollusks. So your mussels, your scallops, oysters, produced in massive numbers all around the world, pretty easy to produce. And then marine finfish. This is the one we're going to focus on here because it's probably the most interesting one from a European point of view. But I suppose the point I want to make here is that when most people think of aquaculture, they think of salmon farming in the UK. And that's what we think of, cages and things like that. And yeah, it's a really important industry, but to be clear, it is only 7.3 million tons of a huge industry around the world. So it's quite a small part of what aquaculture is globally. It's quite an important part and it makes a lot of money, but it is only a small part. So within marine finfish, we're talking, as I said, salmon, sea bass and sea bream are the three most commonly grown fish in the world at the moment, finfish anyway. And just to go down a little bit more in detail, countries, this figure's from 2010, so it's a bit dated, but it's exactly the same now. So just to give you an idea that basically the dominant factor in aquaculture is China. So 61% of all of aquaculture production in the world is done by China, which I suppose if I was going to ask you to guess, you'd have probably said China. And Asia is a huge player in this, but that is all that freshwater production we were talking about earlier. It's not the marine stuff that we talk about. So Europe as a producer in aquaculture is actually relatively small, certainly compared to Asia. It's not a massive player in scale and tonnage. However, it has some interesting industries, and they're the ones I want to focus on simply because I think they're the ones that be most interested for this presentation to the people I'm talking to. So obviously, I know most people know that Norway is a dominating factor when it comes to salmon farming in the world. So Norway were the people that introduced salmon farming, and they still remain the biggest producer by some distance. The UK is also a significant player. I say the UK, Scotland. So that it is all in Scotland. And then on the bass and bream side, you've got Turkey and Greece. So anyone that's been to Greece may have seen farms located all around. If you fly into a lot of airports, you fly over thousands of these cages. These two countries dominate bass and bream production. And then Spain is also the other one I talk about in terms of mussels. They produce a huge amount of mussels in Spain. Spain are fish mad, so they virtually everything they produce themselves, but they are a dominant player in mussels. And just a general point for you to understand is that if you go to the supermarket, I expect most of you know this, but you go to the supermarket, if you buy a piece of salmon, you buy a piece of bass, or you buy a piece of bream, 99.9% of the time it is farmed. There is very little fresh or wild fish there. There are some exceptions. You often see Alaskan salmon sold, which is about 18 times more expensive. That is wild, but the majority of salmon, the fillets you buy, all of those are farmed. All of the bass and bream you catch are farmed. For a while, it was virtually illegal to catch bass in the UK wild because it was so endangered. So it's very, very rare to find rod and line caught or line caught bass on sale anymore. And if you do, you pay an extreme amount of money for it. And you can tell these fish straight away, bass and bream, because they're all exactly the same size. When you go and buy a bass or a bream from a fishmonger's or anything, they're all exactly the same size. And that's because the farm produces them to the same size, what they call plate size. So I just wanted to focus down on the salmon industry for you and just have a little chat about it, because it's obviously within the UK and within Norway, it's the major aquaculture industry, which is really, really dominant. This picture for you is probably the classic salmon farm that everyone sees pictures of. You know, the cages sat in the sea, usually within a fjord, often surrounded by snow, because salmon are generally grown in cold water environments. And this has been the dominant force in aquaculture in Europe for a long, long time. There are changes occurring, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but it still remains the classic aquaculture scene, shall I say, in Europe. In terms of numbers, the dominant producers I've already told you is Norway. They produce over 1 million tons now of salmon a year, with 1.1 million. That's a extreme amount of salmon. Second in line is Chile. So Chile is an interesting example. So Chile is a very, very newcomer to salmon production, really. The reason they figured out, I mean, Chile used to supply Norway with fish meal, and the fish meal was being fed to the salmon, and Chile realized that they actually had exactly the same growing conditions in Chile as they do in Norway. So why couldn't they just grow salmon in Chile? And so they did. The obvious thing that might come to your mind is that Chile is located on the Pacific and they're growing Atlantic salmon. So they actually introduced a non-native species to do this. They now produce 700,000 tons of Atlantic salmon in the Pacific waters of Chile. So actually they've become endemic. They've escaped, they've become endemic. They live along the coast of Chile now, and pretty much Chile can now say it has its own population of Atlantic salmon, which is a bit of a strange position to be in and a worry for some environmentalists. Chile is also, if you look at them in terms of their production over the years, is the big roller coaster for salmon production. They keep producing lots, then they drop right down, and they go back up, and they produce loads. And that's mainly blamed on the fact that they don't really have very good regulation in Chile, and as a result they have a lot of issues with disease, a lot of issues with fish kills, mass fish kills, and so they end up having a massive boom and bust cycle. So yeah, they're an interesting case study. Second is the UK. Third, sorry, is the UK and Scotland. So we're producing about 200,000 tons in Scotland at the moment, which is quite a lot up on where it has been in previous years. But still a long way behind where Norway is. And yeah, I mean, to be clear, most of the companies producing in Scotland are actually Norwegian, but I'll come on to that in a second. But I'm sure all of you have seen an image in Scotland of a fish farm and located on a loch or something. Canada comes in fourth, 110,000, and then the Faroe Islands. Faroe Islands is a bit of a success story. They've got this reputation for high quality, fresh produce, well produced, etc. Again, relatively newcomer to salmon production in Faroes, and they're doing quite well. So that brings it up to estimated production per year of around 2.6 million tons of salmon being produced, which is a not inconsiderable amount. Within this industry is dominated by 6 or 7 big players. So it's because when salmon farming started, it was all about farmers who basically set up a farm in the water around their houses, and off they went. And it's grown and grown, and it's been overtaken by massive companies. The 4 biggest in the world are down. You've got their logos below there. You've got Maui, which used to be called Marine Harvest. It is the global leader in salmon production by miles. It produces 400,000 tons alone on its own, and its operations are in Norway, Scotland, Chile, everywhere. They're a huge company. Leroy, Cermaq, and Salmon, they're all Norwegian companies as well, and they're the next biggest producers. All of these companies are stock listed companies in Norway. They're all based in Norway, but they have operations all around the world. And so it has become a huge business. Sorry, they're not all stock listed companies. Cermaq isn't. Cermaq is actually owned by the Mitsubishi Corporation in Japan, which is a huge corporation. But the rest of them are all stock listed within Norway. So I suppose the emphasis here is just to make you realize this has become a massive commercial industry. This is not about individual farmers. This isn't, you don't have, like, if you get in the UK, you're growing lambs or sheep or whatever. You've got individual farms who sell on. That's not the way the salmon farming industry works. All the sites are owned by the big players, and there's very little space for individual farms anymore. They just don't really exist. They haven't got the purchasing power or the supply power to really make it work. So they've all been bought up over time into these massive companies. And one of the things I want to focus on here was the technology, because I think that's something that was of interest to this group last time I spoke, and I thought that was something that I might go on to. And really, I want to just highlight where the technological advances are in salmon farming and how technologically advanced it has become as a business. And so just some pictures I'm going to talk through here. Just pretty pictures, always nice to see. So top left, salmon farm at night, you'll see a green light being emitted from it. That's not by mistake. So they've started adding lighting now to salmon farms to extend the photo period. So basically it increases the rate of growth. So they're almost adding light to the cages to make the fish think it's not as dark as it is. They eat more, they grow faster. So people are producing, LED systems that actually light cages nowadays. Even to the point where the different light colors have an effect. Here we're using green light because green light is shown to have a relaxing, stress-free environment for the salmon while introducing extra photo period. It turns more to red light when they start to get to certain times of the year because it starts to trigger different endorphin levels, et cetera, et cetera. It's a massive scientific, base. It's pretty complex, and you can see if this is the level people are going to. Top right. This is actually a picture taken by me. So that's why it's so bad. But it basically shows this guy's actually monitoring the fish in the cages. So you can see on the left-hand screen, that's a camera within the cage with the fish swimming above him. What the camera does is it basically, when the feed drops through the water, it picks up how much that feed is falling through. It picks up how agitated the fish are, i.e. how fast they're feeding. And from that, it can work out whether it needs to feed more or stop feeding. So the aim of the system is basically to feed exactly the right amount of feed and not waste any. Every bit of waste is an operational expenditure that isn't being used. And so they have basically quite complex algorithms built into these systems that feed automatically. The picture below that is the feed system, a feed barge for the same system. So they have a barge, a boat, aboard which these pellets that they feed the fish are based, and they pump them into the cages with individual air compressors that go through these pipes. So the computer tells them when to pump some. It then monitors whether the feed is being eaten. If it is, they'll pump some more, and they'll keep doing that all day. And they'll just keep topping up the feed to make sure that every fish is fed the maximum amount it possibly can. The aim is to feed the fish as much as you can, but without any waste, obviously, because the more you feed them, the more they eat, the faster they grow. And that's what you're after. Feed is by far the biggest cost of fish farming. So it's about 70% of all your operational costs in fish farming are down to what you feed the fish, especially in something like a salmon, which is a carnivorous species. It needs highly expensive diets. It needs lots of fish meal, lots of fish oil. On that subject, I think one of the subjects that people often hear is that it takes 4 tons of fish meal to produce 1 ton of salmon. That's complete rubbish. That was the case about 25 years ago, but now they use very, very little fish meal actually in a salmon's diet nowadays. They've replaced it with other things. And they're operating at feed conversion ratios of less than 1. And what that means is that for every kilo of salmon they produce, they actually use less than a kilo of feed. And you ask, how is that possible? But it's, you include water in that, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what grows. So they're very, very efficient at producing salmon. They're more efficient at producing salmon now than they are at chickens. And that's saying something. So just to give you an idea of how that works. Bottom left photo, this strange little device you can see. This is really cutting edge at the moment. So one of the issues that we have in salmon farming is sea lice. And I think you might all have heard of this in the press, et cetera. This is actually a laser that burns sea lice off salmon. It's sat in the water column. It detects when salmon has sea lice on it, and it actually lasers the salmon lice on the salmon directly and lasers them off. And it floats around the cage doing this on a daily basis. This is, it sounds something like something else, Space Odyssey or something, but this is the level of technology that is going into salmon farming in today's world. This is one option. The other option is people have started putting what they call cleaner fish in the cages as well. So species like wrasse and lumpfish, they will actually eat the lice off salmon. And so, it's more of a natural way of doing it than firing, robotic lasers at fish. But again, sort of highlights how important this issue is to the salmon farmers. Challenges. So I don't think anyone has to go very far to realize that the salmon farming industry is under a lot of pressure from environmental groups. In my view, sometimes unjustified. I think it gets a very bad press often when it doesn't necessarily deserve it. Don't get me wrong, it has issues as an industry, but then what farming industry doesn't have issues? And one of the issues is that salmon is a relative newcomer and has a sort of grown up with social media and all these other things. So it's had to deal with these issues, from day one as it grew, really. So what some of the issues that are associated with salmon farming, I've just talked about sea lice. The top left-hand picture shows you a sea lice infestation on a salmon. The idea being that if you put salmon in a cage, you increase the number of sea lice that the fish are exposed to. A bit like when you send your kids to school and they all get nits. It's a very similar principle. And that's true. You will get increased sea lice numbers in cages. One of the other issues is that you often locate salmon farms at areas where natural salmon are migrating. So, a lot of the lochs of Scotland are natural runs for salmon. And so the idea is if they're passing near to sea cages, they're also transmitting it to the natural salmon and killing wild salmon populations. I don't know if you know, but wild salmon populations in Scotland are about 60% lower than they've been historically. Huge problems. Nobody knows why. A lot of people blame salmon farming for this decline. If I was to be asked, I would say that I'm sure salmon farming has a slight effect, but there's something else going on as well that we don't know about. And bottom left picture is one that's often banded up by people that hate salmon farming to show what happens when a fish is exposed to high levels of sea lice. It basically eats them. And of course, if you put that picture in front of any consumer, it's not a particularly pretty picture, is it? And doesn't really get people thinking they want to have a salmon for their dinner. And so it's created a big problem. The other one that's caused issues recently is sea cage escape. So you can see that bottom right-hand picture is a cage that was destroyed during a storm. The salmon escaped. There's been huge amounts of salmon that have escaped all around the world. In Norway and Scotland, at least they're escaping into a natural environment, i.e. they exist here. But is that better or is that worse? Because they can then, theoretically, they might be able to integrate with wild populations, cause genetic drift. Salmon that are farmed are very different to the salmon in the wild. They're completely different makeups, really. One is designed to just eat as much as it can and doesn't actually do much. The other one is designed to swim and live naturally, etc. So there's worries of what we call genetic drift. However, the ones that escape in Chile created their own wild population. Okay, so they're not competing with any natural populations, but they're also creating a brand new population that never existed. So there's concerns around escapes, and escapes have been an issue. The other issue that's really caused problems in the recent years is that they've run out of sites as well. So you can see that there's been this huge expansion of salmon farming around Europe, and as a result, there's nowhere left to put these cages that everyone will allow, and two, that are suitable for farming. So we've kind of run out of what I call coastal sites, certainly within Scotland and Norway. There's not much space left. And getting planning permission for a new cage farm in Scotland or Norway is virtually impossible at the moment. It's just a very, very difficult thing to do. And so that's left the industry saying, well, if we're going to expand, how are we going to do it if we can't find anywhere to put them? And at the same time, they've got all these environmental pressures, a lot of people pushing them, saying, we think cages should be banned. We think salmon farming is the cause of all evil in the world. And so they've come up, there's been a shift in recent years, and there's starting to be a shift away from cage farming as the future to different technologies and different methods. And this has been going on for a while, but it's really become quite a big subject in the last 5 years, particularly. And there's really 3 solutions to how to grow salmon in the future when you can't do any more what I call coastal cage farming. And the 3 solutions are these ones. They're land-based, they're what we call semi-contained, and they're offshore. If we start with the offshore, which is the bottom picture, this is actually a real life project happening in China. It's actually not for salmon, it's for yellowhead. The picture gives you an idea of the scale of this. This is basically companies that were involved in creating oil rigs now building fish cages. The idea of going offshore is that you can basically take the technology wherever you want. You can put it in the middle of the ocean. All the environmental concerns are massively reduced because you're out in fresh water. You're nowhere near issues on land. Everyone's happy. The big issue with it is obviously, you're exposed to waves, you're exposed to all sorts of other issues. How do you get to it? How do you harvest it? All of those logistical issues that you can probably imagine. And so some people see this as the future. Some people think that the future will be massive offshore cages and the floating around in the middle of the Atlantic. Some of these cages are designed to sink so that when storms come through, they can put them under the water to escape, bring them back up, pump them full of air and bring them back up. Some of them are just designed to be so tough that they wouldn't go anywhere. No one's proven this concept on a business side yet. So these are all concepts that have been, they're putting these things in the water now. They've only just started doing this. Whether they can make money out of it when you take in the cost of building the thing, that's another subject. The next one, top right, semi-contained. The idea here is that we actually do produce fish in the same regions we're currently doing around the coast of Scotland, for example, but we contain the fish within a system that doesn't allow interaction with the natural environment. So you basically create a floating tank in the water, which is self-contained. Many different designs. This one has these two pipes sticking out the bottom, and that's designed that it can integrate with the water from quite deep down. So the idea is you're not interacting with the surface where most sea lice are found, et cetera, et cetera. So you do have some water exchange, but it's from a depth that you wouldn't normally get. So it's not completely contained. There is some mixing with the sea, but it's much more controlled. Number of systems being involved in this. And they've started doing some of these systems in Norway. There's plans to do some in the UK. Again, no one's proved it from a financial point of view yet. And of all the systems, I actually find these probably the least exciting from a financial aspect. I think the costs associated with it are just too high to justify what they're actually doing. Land-based systems. This has been, in the last 5 years, this has been the major growth area, and I say growth loosely, but major growth area in salmon production around the world. So the idea here is that rather than growing them in the sea at all, you grow them in tanks. So you pump seawater on land into tanks, you grow the fish in the tanks, you then recirculate the water, which is what we refer to as RAS, or recirculating aquaculture systems. And basically what you're doing is you're treating the water and putting it back in the tank. Exactly the same as sewage treatment, except for fish. You take the waste product, you get rid of it, you treat it, you put it through biological filtration, you put it through physical filtration, you oxygenate it, and you put it back in the tank, and the fish carry on growing. Obviously, the issue with these things is that, one, they're expensive to run, and two, you need a hell of a lot of tanks to produce the same amount of fish that you can in a cage. So it's a scale thing. However, this has been, over the last 5 years, I've never seen such interest in aquaculture from sort of the private equity sector as I have in this. This is the big growth area for people throwing money in. It's incredible. The amount of money that's being pumped into the sector at the moment is ridiculous. With no one's proved the concept. No one's made any money out of it. And just to emphasize this, I'm just going to take you on now to the biggest producer currently in RAS, which is a company called Atlantic Sapphire. So again, they are the largest land-based salmon producer in the world. They were founded in 2010, and they started with an operation in Denmark, which is actually the picture you'll see on the right here. This is their facility in Denmark. They have huge private equity funding and backing. They have big global banks backing them. ABN AMRO have put a lot of money in, lots of other people. So cash is not an issue. And the aim is to locate their farms near markets that they want to sell. So they've got production they plan in China. They're looking to produce fish in the Middle East directly. You can imagine the issues of growing salmon in Dubai. They've got production in the US, which started in 2019. And they have a production target for the company of 220,000 tons. Now, if you think Maui, which I told you earlier, is 400,000 tons, and they own cage farms all around the world. They're by far the biggest producer, and they're going to produce half of what Maui produced, but in tanks. It's a serious target. And of all the companies that have done it, they're the furthest down the line. And there are benefits and negatives to this. So, now, obviously, the strengths of doing it on land are you've got no pollution. You can control what goes in and out of the system. You're not. Environmentalists love it because they think, well, there's no interaction with the environment. That's great. You don't have any escapes, or if you do, you've done something seriously wrong because they're on land. Some of these farms are located in the middle of, the one in the US is somewhere in the center of the US. They're using deep water aquifers to bring salt water up rather than actually pumping anything from the sea at all. It's a very controlled environment. So theoretically, you can grow these fish. You're basically providing them with life support, and you can give them the exact life support they need to grow at the maximum optimum conditions. You don't have to worry about the water temperature of the sea. You don't have to worry about plankton. You don't have to worry about predators. You can control everything. And you can position them near a market. So, you can literally put them next to wherever you want to sell your fish. So Dubai, it's got a big market at the moment for salmon, which is flown in from Norway. You could grow them in Dubai and sell them directly next door. So you don't have any of the costs associated with shipping or flying this product in. We've got, as I said, it is attractive to investors. At the moment, investors are very, very interested in this business, and they see it as a very exciting way to, very exciting thing for the future. They think it's the future of fish production. I, as you can probably tell from me, I'm slightly less convinced at this stage. The weakness is it remains completely untested. We know we can grow salmon in tanks, but no one's proven again that you can do it economically, commercially, and viably. No one has made money out of it yet. So Atlantic Sapphire, if you look at their accounts for the last 10 years, they've made millions and millions of losses every year. And they keep saying, oh, well, that's, it's a growing business. We always knew we were going to lose money. At some point in the future, they're going to have to make some money. And I'm not sure if they can do it yet. It also has significant electricity needs. So it's all very good saying that there's no pollution, but from a carbon point of view, the amount of electricity needed to do this is huge. And so if you're not using renewable energy, there are question marks over whether it's actually environmentally friendly at all, really. And there's also a lot of these systems have had huge growing problems. So like Atlantic Sapphire recently, they were in the press last week because they had a massive fish kill. Basically, something went wrong. And when things go wrong in these systems, they go wrong very, very quickly. And within 10 minutes, they'd lost 6,000 tons of fish. So, the risks are really high. Yes, you can control everything, but if something goes wrong, you're in real trouble. Just moving on from that to just quickly to some of the other developments. I'm not going to spend much time on this at all, but just salmon's the big one. But there's also just wanted to point out that there's been quite a big development in mussel farming as well recently. There's a company called Offshore Shellfish Limited who are now operating in Lyme Bay down in Dorset. And they're producing over 10,000 tons per year of mussels. And to give you an indication, most farms in the UK produce 500 tons. Probably they're small scale farms. They don't produce much at all. These guys decided, well, why don't we produce offshore? So they're about 3 to 6 miles offshore in a big area and produce volume, massive volume. The way they've done it, you can see that picture, they've got little buoys floated with lines hanging between it. And then they've got these huge long lines that drop down into the water on which the mussels grow. And that picture in the middle shows one of these lines with the mussels growing. The mussels are put on there by a machine. They literally put in a sock to hold them in, and then they attach themselves. And then they come along, take the sock off, and they just grow and grow and grow. And then eventually they'll take them off the line using one of these machines here, the boat that you can see. They strip the mussels off the line and sell them. This sort of scale of production has never been seen in Europe before. So this is a real game shifter that these guys say, well, we can make money out of doing this. And this is the way to grow mussels in the future. Or, the scale is a different level. And we know we can do it. The technology is fine. The technology works really well. They produce lots of mussels. There's no problems producing mussels. However, there are issues with this. And one of the big issues is they keep getting run into by boats because they're located 3 to 6 miles offshore. Yes, they're on a map, but they've never been there before. They've had, I think, 6 vessel strikes in the last year, which has caused over 7-8 million pounds worth of damage. And obviously that goes through insurance processes, etc. But it's a real pain in the butt for them, to be quite frank. And the bigger problem for them, and this is not necessarily anything to do with technology, is that because of Brexit, they no longer have a market. So they sold 100% of their product abroad. And it was wiped out overnight because of regulations around what we call, not desalination. Basically, when you grow mussels in certain quality of water in the UK, you have to put them into depuration units. So you have to put them in tanks to clean before you send them abroad. And under EU legislation, they had a sort of, they were allowed to do that and sell to the EU. And then once the rules changed, it basically meant they had to put these mussels through depuration before they could sell to the EU. Now, if you imagine trying to put 10,000 tons of mussels through tanks and clean them before you send them, it's just not physically possible. There isn't enough depuration in Europe to do that, let alone in the UK. So their market has been completely destroyed by Brexit. But just an interesting case study on what's been going on and you know, the scale that's going on in aquaculture. Just reaching the end, I just wanted to go through some of the technology opportunities that exist within the industry and some of the really interesting things that are going on again. Massive move to automated systems, requiring increasingly complex sensory equipment. So a lot of the salmon cages we're seeing, a lot of these offshore facilities, they have no people on them whatsoever. It is all automated. The systems do everything. They feed, they check everything, they do everything themselves. They tell people what's going on. They check the water, they check the salinity, they check the temperature. They monitor everything. And these systems are becoming more and more advanced as time comes on. Supply vessels are becoming more and more complex and bespoke. So the industry is whole industry has grown out of what we call well boats. And these are the boats that basically go out to the cages and they put the fish in, they take the fish out, they bring the feed out, they do all of these sort of things. Just to give you an example, this boat on the right, this picture on the right is one of the latest ones that's been designed. It's 116 meters long. So I mean, it looks like a massive fishing vessel, but this is just to supply fish cages. It has live vessel pumping and life support. So it basically will take fish out there alive and it will bring them back alive from harvest. So it'll put the babies in and it'll bring them back all on the wellboat systems that's got. It also, one of the things salmon have problems with disease. One of the things you can do is you can treat them in fresh water. Now, obviously that in practice is very difficult because they're in seawater cages. However, what they've done with this boat is they've actually put on a massive freshwater production plant, basically desalination system, which can produce about 16,800 meters cubed of fresh water in 24 hours. They can fill their own tanks full of fresh water. They can pump the salmon on board the vessel, let them sit there alive, cleanse themselves, like a bit like a spa, and then then they pump them back into the cages, and that's the treatment done. So I mean, the scale is huge, really, and this has created a whole maritime industry around vessel construction. They've also, other vessels have been designed which allow the processing of these salmon directly. So you can actually take them on board, process them, and they can put them in backs. And by the time they reach the shore, they're ready to go off to market. I mean, that's the next stage, really. ROV use significantly increased in the industry. So they've always been used. I mean, the picture down on the bottom left, that's an ROV being used for net checking. They're just checking the nets aren't damaged, etc. They've also introduced automated cleaning machines that just literally go around the nets, cleaning off the algae to make sure that the water can get through them. They're becoming more and more complex and better at what they do. Some of the farms, for example, this mussel farm I was talking about, they're looking at using ROVs to stop vessels coming into the area because it obviously hasn't worked putting them on a map and putting a light on it. So they're wondering if they can have systems that can identify threats and go out and let them know that they're coming near to the area because of the losses. The picture in the middle is what we call a fish drone. These are literally ROVs that float around in the cages and basically imitate being a fish in a way and basically provide live data on what's going on. So they can monitor what the fish are doing, they can monitor the fish's health, the water conditions, and it all gets fed back into the computer to allow them to change, to do whatever they need to do, whether that be feed more, feed less, treat the fish, harvest the fish. You can tell them what size the average fish is, all these sort of things. So you can see technology's just gone through the roof. And there's the drive to offshore will definitely continue, but the improved engineering is still an issue. There still needs to, the more and more people like oil companies are getting involved in this because the technologies are quite advanced in terms of engineering. Anyway, I hope that just gives you a very brief overview of where the European salmon farming particularly is and where the aquaculture industry's gone, the technology involved in it now. Apologies if any of that was stuff you already knew, but happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thanks very, very much, Max. That was, a really useful catch-up, to be honest. And I think I certainly learned a few things, particularly about the onshore. I thought that was anecdotal for a long time, that moving to onshore, but obviously that was a while ago, and seems like a big thing now. I heard that they consider, certainly in the UK, using pastoral farms that already exist, that have been doing cows and sheep and stuff, and changing them. Is that anecdotal, or is that genuine?
No, that's definitely being considered as well. I'm a bit of a doubter on land-based farming, if I'm honest, for salmon. So I think it's a classic case of people being so excited that they can do it, they're not thinking about whether they should do it or not. And the financial gains of it and the economics of it, for me, don't make sense at this particular moment in time. But yes, they are using pastoral farms. That people are switching their uses over. That's one way of doing it. I mean, to grow salmon on land, you need a source of freshwater and saltwater. So salmon, when they're young, are grown in freshwater. And then they smoltify and they grow into saltwater conditions. So you need both. So you need to be able to get hold of both. So depending how deep you go with your well, for example, there's questions about whether you can get the right quality of water. So, and getting enough fresh water is a massive issue in some places, because abstraction licenses for the amount of water you need for fresh water, certainly in places like America, are very, very difficult to come by because there's droughts going on. So yeah, there are definitely examples of that going on. My view on it is a little bit, why would you want to produce land-based salmon in Scotland when you can produce it in the sea still? I know if you want to produce more, it's there. If you're doing it in Dubai, I kind of get it a bit more, because you can't do it in the sea in Dubai. And if you really think you can supply a market and you can do it economically, then it makes sense. So if you're going to do it, there needs to be an economical reason for me for doing it, basically. Okay,
thanks. Emma, can you manage raised hands for any more questions?
Yeah, that's fine. If anyone has any questions, they can. Oh, Anthony.
Hi, thanks. Max, love that presentation. Thank you for taking the time to do that for us. I have a question. It's on the definition, really. And the reason I'm asking is the last two government grants for R&D and marine specifically discounted any projects for aquaculture. And I'm trying to get my head around their definition, because you started by saying you do 60% fishing and 40% aquaculture, but then the presentation inferred that aquaculture is anything to do with growing stuff in the water.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's a really good question. What do you define as aquaculture? What don't you? So the truth of the matter is that the R&D grants in the UK have excluded aquaculture because the government have always said they're going to do something separate for aquaculture, because it's such an important industry, but they never have. So they've done a little bit. So they've done through what they called the European Fishing Fund. They included aquaculture in the grants side of that. So the idea is it was kind of attached more to fishing grant related stuff than it was to development, and so the other side of it. But what you define aquaculture is a really, really good question. So for example, I would say salmon farming is a classic aquaculture, but then mussel farming. Okay, so you're growing them on cages. You're not feeding them. They're feeding naturally in the sea, but you're growing them on ropes. So I guess that's farming. What about if you relay? So some people relay the mussels on the seabed. So they just take mussels, they move them, they put them on the seabed, and when they grow, they then dredge them up and sell them. Now that's, all you're doing is moving mussels from one location to another. So whether that counts as aquaculture is a whole different ballgame. So there isn't a defined definition of aquaculture, but my definition would be it has to have some form of sort of human impact or input into it, really, which has to be significant. Whether that answers your question or not, I'm not 100% sure, but yeah.
I think they're just trying to avoid conflict with Private Eye, who are very much against salmon farming.
Yeah,
it's just interesting that the two grants specifically excluded that. But if there's more to come, then that's great. Thank you.
That's good. No problems.
Thank you very much. David, have you got a question?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with quite a few fish farm companies up in Scotland, and part of that's because we're linked with one of our brands who are Norwegian, so they clearly worked with salmon farming for a long time. And throughout my work with them, it's always been tough to get them to spend money on technology, on monitoring kit, etc. And I guess in some ways I've always thought, well, the clue's in the name, farmer. And they've always struggled to spend it. It's got to the case where actually some fish farms have tried to work together. So they've tried to group money together, and their farms are local to each other, and they've invested together to do some environmental monitoring, like an early warning system. But do you feel that with the scale of it and the demand for it increasing, do you see a change that they really are now happy to spend? They've been burnt enough by having big fish kills. It's massive money if one farm gets wiped out by a bloom or anything like that.
That's a fantastic question, David. So I would agree with you that they can be quite tight when it comes to spending money. And I would agree that there was a slight link to farmers who don't like to spend money generally. So I don't think I've ever met a farmer anywhere that likes spending a lot of money on stuff. And of course, I'd also agree with you that most farmers never appreciate spending money until after an event when they wish they'd spent it before then. So I think one of the things that's changed in the last 5 years is this pressure that's coming onto them from the other technologies that are coming out, the land-based farming, the move offshore, and these are all putting pressure on them to up their game. Supermarkets in the UK, supermarkets obviously the major driving force in what we as a retailer buy, or sorry, as a consumer buy. Most of us are pretty boring. We go into our supermarket and we buy what's on the shelf, and we don't go, well, I'm not buying that because that one's not doing this or not doing that. And so the supermarkets drive it, and their drive towards improving standards within salmon farming has definitely seen an increase in environmental considerations. Farms have had to get much better at this sort of thing, and the risks are becoming more and more well known. And so I would say yes, there is a shift there. However, what I would also say is some of these big companies think that maybe the future lies outside of traditional coastal cage farming. And so maybe the other technologies we've talked about are where they're going. And so as a result, they've started saying, well, maybe we shouldn't spend so much money on the traditional farms and start spending more money on our investment on the new opportunities that lay out there, the land-based farming, the offshore opportunities. So there's a real mixture. Some think that the new land-based is just an absolute waste of time, and it will never take off and it will never take over as the dominant. There'll always be coastal farming. And then some think that the other way around. Within companies, they're having, like Maui are having an argument about it now internally about whether they think they should move more towards land-based, or they should stay with their traditions, or they should do a combination. So I don't think anyone really knows the answer to it, but I would say there's definitely money to be spent within the industry. Getting out of them is always difficult, but when you look at the amount of money some of these companies are spending on some of the other projects they're doing, it's insane. So there is money to be spent. It's just trying to get it out of them is very difficult.
You're definitely seeing some of the smaller players that were up in Scotland have all been gobbled up, and they're all being brought under, like Maui, for example, is one of them.
Exactly. I think the day of small farming production in salmon farming is long gone. It just doesn't exist. And also, if it did exist, they'd be stupid, because still there's an appetite, because these companies can't get any new licenses. They're paying quite a lot of money to buy small producers out, and so it's a bit like having a house in Kensington and not working in London. You'd sell it and move, wouldn't you? I mean, I don't see there being a market for small scale producers in the longer term at all. I think it'll all be done by the big companies.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Has anyone else got any questions? I don't think I can see anyone. No? All right. Well, then in that case, thank you very much, Max. That was brilliant. Terry, I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah, likewise, Max, thank you very much. And we will circulate the talk around the wider community. Thanks very much indeed. I don't know whether you know, but a lot of the people here will be at Ocean Business in October. So if you're around, I'm sure there'll be opportunities to follow up some chats.
That's great. Well, thank you for your time. Pleasure to see you all. It'd be lovely to meet someone in person again one day. And if you have any questions, just ask, and you can drop me a line.
Perfect. Thanks,
Thank you, Max.
Take care. Bye-bye.